I imagine that my introduction to the character Ness was similar to many of you, discovering him within the Super Smash Bros. Series. In the original, I remember seeing the Challenger approaching screen, desperate to know who it could be, and when it was revealed to be some goofy looking kid, I'm not sure if disappointed is strong enough a word to describe how I felt about his presence. I'd eventually learn Ness was from the little-known Super Nintendo game Earthbound, known as Mother 2 in Japan. And after playing it for the first time a few years ago, it quickly became obvious that it was me who was the silly boy all along. As dismissing Ness as nothing more than a wildcard addition to the Smash roster meant I was passing up on looking into one of the most engaging and unique Japanese role-playing games ever created. Amongst its brethren, which told epics of mages and time travel, Earthbound would use its genre to instead reminisce of childhood. The game was an inviting look through the rose-tinted lens of 90s Americana, employing humor and oddity to unpack the trauma associated with growing up and losing your innocence. An experience that was unashamedly a video game, one that embraces the medium to convey its narrative in ways the industry had never seen before. Its sheer creativity arguably still unrivaled. However, despite these strengths, this game's arrival in 1995, not unlike its main character in Smash, was met by a Western audience with deafening silence. This was during a time where JRPGs would continually fail to sell here. Pre-Final Fantasy VII, arguably the turning point for the genre's global success on the back of a multi-million-dollar marketing campaign.
They said it couldn't be done in a major motion picture. They were right. Final Fantasy VII.
PlayStation.
Nintendo's idea of drumming up hubbub for Earthbound was, through fart-based advertising in their magazine. Remember scratch and sniff collector stickers? Critically, it wouldn't fare much better, as reviewers would pan the title for its simplistic graphics at a time where pixel and sprite art were reaching new heights, and where whispers of the forthcoming third dimension were at the forefront of everyone's minds. It seemed like Earthbound was destined to become an obscure and forgotten relic of the Super Nintendo. But unbeknownst to most, beyond its lackluster first impression and underneath its simplistic surface, Earthbound's arrival would create a silent yet seismic shift in the role-playing genre, its impact on the industry still being felt to this day. I mean, if you're a fan of any recent RPG that has ever been described as weird or quirky or charming, I'm willing to bet my cat it has its origins in Earthbound. Titles like Undertale, Lisa, and Yume Nikki, to name but a few, all owe the Mother series an insurmountable debt. While it certainly arrived to cold indifference, Earthbound's legacy as a significant addition to the medium has become undebatable. No, I was just kidding, Rory, I would never do that to you. However, being such an old game, and for the longest time remaining inaccessible to those unwilling to either emulate or drop an insane amount of money, it's left Earthbound a game that not many people have played, despite the endless praise and documented influence it's received over the last 25 years. So in this video, I'd like to try and explain the appeal of Earthbound and why I think it is worth going back to play, detailing what it does well, its significance and permanent impact within the medium, and why it's worthy of the adoration, nay devotion it receives from its rabid fanbase. A cult following so passionate and dedicated it's honestly shocking how large it is, considering how little they've been given over the years. And while we're here, I should clarify I'm going to be basing this video off of my own experience, thoughts and feelings, and don't want to make it sound like I'm speaking on behalf of the fandom. So with that out of the way, and to get into all of this, I think it's important we first discuss the person behind Earthbound, as this game remains the brainchild of a single individual, a fascinating man who bore his soul to make the Mother series a reality. A prolific author of the odd and extraordinary, Shigesato Itoi is the solitary writer of the Mother trilogy, and would wield an impressive resume prior to its development. His extensive career would include copywriting during Japan's economic boom period of the 70s and 80s, co-writing a short story/thought collection with the legendary author Haruki Murakami, and voice acting as the dad in Studio Ghibli's My Neighbor Totoro. And while it's certainly a cool list of stuff to have done, the reason I mention it is because it's important to distinguish here that Itoi is not a product of the gaming industry. He didn't have that typical story of rising through the development ranks as an overworked and underpaid programmer that blossomed into an auteur extraordinaire. Rather, he was already well established with a successful career that had spanned over decades. And after deciding to develop a video game in the late 80s as a fan of the budding medium, he'd enter Nintendo's offices to be met by a team of admirers eager to assist with his vision. A project that would serve as an extension of what he'd spent his entire career cultivating. A unique worldview through his bizarre and comical yet somewhat melancholy writing style. Offering a voice that's innocent, perhaps bordering on naive, Itoi would describe his offbeat approach to storytelling by explaining, "Being weird or goofy isn't my only aim. I have this strong desire to make people feel distraught. I want to give them laughter and joy too, but I'm always filled with the desire to make people feel ever so slightly heartbroken." And it was this approach to storytelling that would define the experience of his first game, as Itoi would be solely responsible for writing every single line of dialogue himself, meaning the final product couldn't help but be wholly Itoi. Released in 1989, his game would simply be titled Mother. In terms of gameplay, Mother was an experience that was deeply flawed, with problems that have only expanded with time, but one that remains incredibly unique nonetheless. As for what Mother lacked in tight gameplay and swanky graphics, was more than made up for with brimming personality, containing some of the most clever, funny, and engaging writing that you could find on the hardware. Itoi's efforts would spawn a trilogy of games that were to be defined by this feverish personality. All of which I think, in a way, serve as an extension of Itoi, as he'd suggest each game is best enjoyed at different and specific periods in your life, meaning this trilogy of individual stories connected only through lore can be observed as a whole to represent the aging process, as it's this recurring theme of leaving childhood and that loss of innocence that each game in the series offers a unique take on. And while I adore Mother 3 and is certainly a discussion for another time, I think that amongst these, the best at effectively conveying those themes is Earthbound. The story begins with our boy Ness awaking one night to the sound of a meteorite crashing into his small town. Upon investigating, he's greeted by a bee sent from the future, who informs him that the world has been plagued by the evil being Gygus, who has already consumed so much of it with hatred that most of the people and animals have become, like, super vicious. And if Ness doesn't stop his path of destruction, he'll bring chaos upon the entire world. So leaving home for adventure, Ness is destined to lead a ragtag group of misfits including the nice girl, the spiritual boy, and the nerdy one, which we can recognize because if you look closely, he actually has glasses. Now that is genius character design. As they band together to conquer the world's 8 sanctuary locations to gather the power required to stop Gygus' plans. While the idea of an epic adventure RPG featuring a main character that's revealed to be the Chosen One wasn't exactly breaking new ground, it was the way Earthbound went about it that immediately had it standing out. As when we compare it to some of the other JRPGs available on the hardware, especially considering it was released in the same year as both Final Fantasy VI and Breath of Fire 2, which many would consider 2 of the best JRPGs on the console, we'll realize the story offered in Earthbound isn't nearly as layered or intricate by comparison. Earthbound's narrative isn't driven by larger-than-life protagonists whose ideologies clash in dramatic and explosive cutscenes full of shocking plot twists. In fact, what little of it there is takes somewhat of a backseat to the minutiae, because what Earthbound does focus on, and what it does superbly, are the moments in between. When you're traveling among story locations and your party just happens to stumble upon the unordinary. Moments that in other JRPGs would usually be considered downtime or are required to be used for hollow grinding, take the spotlight here for some of the most memorable moments the game has to offer. And it's this hyper-specific attention to the world and the everyday happenings in it that makes Earthbound so different. While there is conflict in the form of a potential world-ending threat, the game barely stops to focus on it because it wants to show you the way more fun and interesting stuff over here. And at a time where some JRPGs, and more importantly the industry critiquing them, took their narratives extremely seriously, I consider Earthbound brave to have tried something different. In that sense, the genre it belongs to feels more like a template that the game's foundations began on, which it quickly distances itself from and arguably even parodies, rather than feeling like a defining mold that it restricts itself to fit. Aside from a turn-based battle system, nothing here feels like your traditional JRPG, and I think the reason for that has a lot to do with the setting in which it takes place. While I'd love to time travel back to ye old tavern where I could dismount my horse, plonk a bag of coins on the counter, and demand only the finest ale in a failed attempt to numb the deep emotional wounds that I've acquired along my perilous journey, it's not exactly a world that I can relate to. However, the world of Earthbound is one that immediately feels homely and recognizable. The suburbia found here offers me, specifically, a respite that a medieval inn could never. Visiting the chain stores that plague its towns, browsing the markets found within the park, and loitering around the malls are all experiences that I have burnt into my subconscious. And I think the reason this game's setting feels so tangible is because of something I consider an ever important aspect in media: its ability to be reflective of the time it's made in. For example, SSX Tricky isn't a game that changed the industry forever, but it is incredibly indicative of its time. It's so unashamedly early 2000s that I can't help but find it incredibly endearing. Get to the side 'cause I'm the bone cracker, the come from behind, I'm the back attacker. So with this in mind, I think Earthbound excels at the feeling of being a kid in that time. It isn't trying to harken back to a period with a wink and a nudge asking if you got the reference and also remember the thing. Rather, it is a product of that era, holding up a mirror to 90s American suburbia during a time where most JRPGs were still heavily inspired by their fantasy-oriented predecessors. Rather than confronting a dragon, Earthbound would touch upon subjects such as political and police corruption, the very legitimate danger of modern cults, and the ugly underbelly of show business. All genuine problems Western society were and are still facing in the real world. And because so much of Earthbound's world is deeply resonating, as a player you feel compelled to explore it, not unlike a child in the suburbs with nothing but time. And it's this feeling of traversing this modern world as a modern child that allowed Earthbound to be wholly unique. As these child protagonists, beacons of naivety and innocence, lent themselves to the absurdist, surreal, and downright bizarre happenings of Earthbound. I don't think I've played a video game that so accurately depicts the life of a child. Unlike other games that would have child protagonists like Pokemon, where its world would come to treat you as the best and the greatest and oh my god, you're so cool, we all love you because your monkey beat up my sheep. The world of Earthbound by comparison does not have time for you. No one is stopping you for your thoughts or opinions. Most adults in this world treat you as if you don't have any, as if they're speaking at you, not to you. And with Ness as a silent protagonist, it makes it all the more isolating. These conversations end abruptly, as if he can't even get a word in even if he wanted to. The wealthy older residents of the tourist trap that is the Summers Hotel openly despise your presence. And the reason I mention this is because it's playing as a child that's at the heart of this experience. Earthbound isn't about childhood, but rather that hazy, dreamlike, nostalgia-fueled memory we all have of it. The recollection of what it was like to be lost and confused as to why adults do things. At a loss as to why your annoying neighbor is the way he is. Left exploring the world with so many questions and none of the answers. And it's because of this shared experience that the game draws upon that makes it all the more effective when it shockingly abandons that coziness of suburban life to swerve into the paranormal and supernatural. Through moments like your first steps into the sprawling city of Forsyth, where the skyscrapers are so tall you can't even see the top of them, and how it then transforms into the fever dream alternate reality Moonside. Not only does it look aesthetically gorgeous and feel radically different from anything else the 16-bit hardware had to offer, but it's also all lovingly crafted to tie into the themes of Earthbound. I just chose Moonside here as one of a dozen possible examples because honestly they're all memorable. But more importantly, areas like this don't exist for the sake of being weird. Rather, I think they're representative of those new, foreign experiences that happened growing up, attempting to recapture those terrifying feelings that accompany leaving home for the first time. The loneliness, the insignificance in the face of power and authority, the fear of so many new responsibilities. In moments where you're fighting the abstract works of Dali within Moonside, suddenly the suburban life captured in Ness's hometown seems so far away. And I struggle to think of other games that choose to explore feelings in this way like Earthbound does. As while these child protagonists meant the game was able to explore themes of innocence and naivety in the face of growing up and the trauma that might come with that, what it also meant was that they would exist as the perfect fodder for Earthbound's bizarre gags. So I'd like to briefly touch upon the humor of Earthbound and how it was used to help offset these darker aspects of the game and to further distinguish itself from everything else out at the time. Because nothing says funny quite like a video essay that breaks down how comedy is used to enrich the narrative of a children's Super Nintendo game. To understand how Earthbound manages to walk the line between humor that's considered the lol so random XD brand to something a little more charming and genuinely heartfelt, it's important we first look at how the genre of comedy has historically been used in the medium. I think we can break down just about every game considered funny or containing humorous elements, whether intentional or not, into two categories: games that explore comedy through chaos and those through narrative. The first being particularly interesting, as exclusive to the medium of video games, something really unique occurs. Rather than presenting the player with the joke and then having them respond to that, the player can instead both find and create humor even where it isn't intended. It's almost always the result of some bizarre glitch in which the game breaks and things begin flopping about in ways they were never supposed to. And perhaps even more intriguing is that some developers would spot how massively popular these instances were, and would actually begin creating games around this concept of chaos and things going wrong, crafting mayhem intentionally but masking it to make the player feel like they were the ones who created it. Take 2014's Goat Simulator, for example. If you've ever played it or remember the 15 minutes it was popular, you'll recall the game was silly, unrealistic anarchy as it lets you live out the fantasy of being a very cross goat let loose within society. There's nothing to read into here beyond a goat rushing the streets determined to wreak havoc, and there doesn't need to be because it's inherently funny. However, after you've clopped about for a bit and the adrenaline wears off, the fun just kind of stops to reveal a game that's a bit shallow and lifeless. Because the type of humor it presents just isn't sustainable for a multi-hour experience. Knowing this, other games would use humor not through chaos but through narrative, earning laughs via the riskier, albeit more rewarding, written route. The Portal series is often touted as a standout example, despite primarily being puzzle platformers. Through dialogue, they give a charming personality to a futuristic world that would have otherwise felt extremely bland and wooden without it. Perhaps it's unfair to compare the two games here that take entirely different approaches to humor, but I think the goofs are so much stronger when weaved into the narrative like this. Because not only do they have the bonus of expertly delivered voice lines, but many of the jokes also tie directly into the gameplay. So there's that same degree of participation, but with the nuance of displaying the characters' personalities at the same time. Which brings us back to Earthbound, as I'd consider it one of the first games to marry both styles together. Now, there are some classic PC-DOS games like The Secret of Monkey Island and Day of the Tentacle that predate it by a few years, but in terms of Western console releases, Earthbound was a turning point for humor in video games, as most of the laughs here are grounded in that idea of innocence we discussed. Meaning those unexpected wacky moments are here too, but there's also that second layer of understanding that the kids are just too naive to stop and question anything they're witnessing. Some of the situations they find themselves in so bizarre that many of the jokes have this lingering, almost uneasy silence after the punchline. And because of this approach, it allows the game to tackle some pretty serious themes underneath the humor, comparable to something like the Peanuts comics. Both properties are simplistic in art style and use their gags to tackle fairly adult subject matter while cloaked in Americana. And I understand that breaking down comedy to this degree will all but ruin anything I could talk about as an example here, so I'll just point out that for many, Earthbound might have been the first time that experienced humor through the medium of video games. And opting for the absurd and innocent, it gave it this unforgettable charm. You could almost argue it's even more impressive than something like a Portal 2, because that excellent voice acting isn't here to strengthen a joke with tone and delivery. It manages to remain funny through text alone, and I struggle to recall many other games, and I'm talking before or since, that are this fun to read. But if I had to pinpoint Earthbound's signature gag, its influential comedic elements, its strongest joke, whatever you'd like to call it, I'd look no further than the fourth wall break. Numerous times during your playthrough will the game directly address the player, or real-world events, or then current celebrities, or even Earthbound the video game itself. Even in 2020, an age where so many games will force you to do the murder and then turn around and ask you how you could sleep at night for doing so, I can't stress how innovative acknowledging the player within the game's narrative was in 1995. It simply did not happen. Which brings me to my last point. It's showing you its story, its atmosphere, the role you assume, the humor it provides, all explored in ways you'd never seen in the medium before, all culminate in the greater point I'm trying to make here. The reason I think Earthbound is absolutely worth your attention, why it's fondly remembered as way ahead of its time. It all works because Earthbound knows what it is. It declared its existence and identity as a video game. Here's what I mean. Nothing gets me to roll my eyes quicker, quite like the game that tries to be something else. A story that's almost embarrassed to be in a video game. Something that you could scoop up, drop into another medium, and have it still function almost the same. Now there will be someone watching this that argues that that's a good thing, and I dig that. I certainly don't mean to sound like I outright despise anything I've shown here. I think I just prefer when a game can only exist as a game. A story that's so intertwined with the medium it's presented in that it would become unrecognizable if adapted, because it uses the assets exclusive to video games to create an entirely unique experience. For example, being a kid leaving home for the first time, our main character Ness experiences homesickness. The game could have indicated this to us by having him turn to Paula and say, "Golly gosh, I really miss home," but instead, the game opts to show us this in the last place you'd expect, within the battles. As Ness's homesickness is treated by the game as a status ailment in the same way poison or paralysis would be. Ness unable to perform the commands you select as he daydreams of home, missing his mum. The only way to cure him is to go into town and use a public phone to call home and hear her voice. I love this aspect of Earthbound so much because amidst the chaos, amongst all the absurdity and paranormal, remains a moment of humanity. You could make the argument that homesickness as a mechanic in a video game is unnecessary, that it's tedious and only inconveniences the player. But I think it's only because of moments like this that allow Earthbound to show us genuine human emotion, doing so in a way no other medium could. And I think this game is built on so many of these small but powerful moments, perhaps the most symbolic being the one I'm about to spoil. So by all means skip here if you're even a little intrigued and would like to go into this game blind. It happens right after the final boss fight, where the war is over and the world has been saved. The children brought together by destiny deciding to now go their separate ways as Paula asks you to walk her home. And having just experienced the most stressful, grueling fight in the game, the ultimate test of everything you've learnt thus far, where the fate of the world rested in your puny child hands, you're left to stroll back through everywhere you've previously visited, alongside your first companion who's been through so much of this journey with you. And for the first time, everything is just quiet. In a game where all the best parts are in the text, this moment didn't need to say anything, because it captured what Earthbound is. A game about growing up on streets that look just like this one, poking fun at and exaggerating all of the things that happen on it, what it feels like to leave it behind in pursuit of a greater purpose, and what it's like to return to it as a different person. Earthbound captures childhood at its most mundane and most surreal, making sure it shows you everything in between. And despite first existing on the dinky old Super Nintendo as the game turns 25 this year, it's an experience that I still often think about. So should you be even a little interested in anything I've talked about today, I strongly recommend you give this game a chance yourself. For a minute there, this game was actually unavailable to purchase if you missed the Super Nintendo cartridge back in the day, which, you know, everyone did. But as of 2013, you can now find Earthbound on the Wii U and new 3DS eShop for pretty cheap, and can also be spotted hiding in there amongst all the games on the SNES Mini. And even if you've decided this game isn't for you, well, I mean, wow, props to you for sticking around, and I hope I've at least given some insight as to why so many people consider this something really special. In so many ways, Earthbound changed the industry, and I don't think it gets nearly enough praise for doing so. I just hope I was able to do my part in explaining why. Thanks for watching.